So Jim, there was a question that came in. There is untapped inventory vacant, and how can we get lenders to release vacant homes they continue to pay for and hold on to?
All right, that's a good question. So the question was, there's untapped inventory in vacant homes, and how do we get lenders to release them? My understanding is that is a really complicated process, and maybe one of the lenders in the room could speak to it at some point. But where's Jeff McCann? Adam Bellwood put the task force together, look at vacant abandoned property a few years ago. I sat on that task force, and what an eye-opener to how complicated that process is. There are laws and insurance regulations and things that make it very difficult for the lenders to just give those properties back. There is a very strong desire to give somebody in the family, if somebody passes away, to give them a chance to come back and claim that home, and there's delays built into the system. It's really complicated. I don't think it's as easy as just saying, banks own 1,000 homes that are vacant in Rochester, let's put them on the market. There are legal and court things, and I think came up with a way to streamline the process and cut a big chunk of time out, but it still is 6 to 9 months, roughly, something like that? Yeah.
If I can share one thing, I don't know if I should be saying this in such a big thing. We did receive word that the state has approved our application to create a land bank. So, awesome. We will be doing it outside of the city of Rochester. We're going to try to do it together, but there were some administrative complications. We're still partnering with the city with that, but we received word last week, so that's something we will be working on.
Awesome.
We just got word last week, and again, I don't know if that was officially the case, but we will be making progress on that later this year.
Perfect. So. Yeah, that's great. So it's a really great question. A little more complicated than maybe it seems at the surface.
So, I do want to welcome our guests. So Jim obviously has been speaking. Everybody knows him. Next to Jim is Bob Duffy, the president and CEO of the Greater Rochester Chamber. Jim Barbado, the president and owner of Pride Mark Homes. And next to me here is Matt Hurlbutt, the president and CEO of the Greater Rochester Enterprise. So each one of these gentlemen joined us today to kind of provide some insight into the impact that real estate has. Not only, we think about a lot of times real estate and how does it impact us, right? Individually, is there another home for my buyer to buy? Is there another mortgage for my mortgage to do? And this is much bigger than that, right? And Jim touched on it a little bit, but I really challenge everyone to think about, as we go through this conversation and you listen to the dialogue, think beyond what you do every day. As individuals and organizations, we can have a direct impact on those people we serve, but together we can really have an impact on our community. And that impact on the community is greater and will trickle down into those individuals that we serve. So again, through that spirit of collaboration, how do we all work together? There was an article published in December, and again, this is kind of redundant, but Realtor.com published an article of the top 10 real estate markets for 2024, and Rochester was number 3 on that list. Normally, that would be great news, right? It'd be exciting to be the number 3 person on that list, but then when you dive in and you really understand the reasons why, it's because we're forecasted to have a 10.4% appreciation rate in the area, which is second only which is the third highest. But then we're also forecasted to have a 6.2 increase in home sales, which is only 2% lower than Grand Rapids, Michigan, right? So again, under normal circumstances, great news, we're number 3, but then when you really dive in, you understand the reasons why. So Jim, last year when you presented, you talked about some of this stuff, right? The things that are keeping you up at night and kind of where we're headed, which sparked the start of this Rochester housing inventory white paper that was created. So everybody on your table has an executive summary of the white paper, and on the back of that is everyone's bios. We didn't want to use the time to talk through everyone's bios, so we printed them out for you if anybody wants to read about our guests further. So Jim, maybe you can shed some light on kind of how this all came about and what's gone into this thus far.
But I think I touched on it just a few minutes ago. I think the key was, as we were preparing for this talk last year, is realizing that this is now 3, 4, 5 years, but the shortage in inventory has been happening for 15 years. This started around the recession, 2006. And there's this slow bleed of homes off the market, and it hasn't changed in a long time. And you can't blame anyone only one cause. New construction delays is one of them, but there's a lot of things that contribute to it, which makes it hard to identify, but also makes it hard to find solutions. You can't, like Joel said, if we could just build 1 million houses in the next 2 years, everything would be better. But we can't. You can't do that. Even if we had everything ready, there are enough people to build them. So we started thinking about what creative solutions can we have, and that's where the white paper came from.
There were a lot of people even in this room that came together and did that. And you talk about the
Yes.
type of people that kind of contributed to it, and what are some of those ideas?
Yeah, we put together a group of lenders, builders, and realtors, a few community participants, just adding a little bit of expertise, and had multiple meetings, just talking about the ideas, which ones seemed to make sense, which ones we should keep talking about, which ones probably didn't deserve to be in the white paper.
Right, and I remember from being part of that, right, there was a lot of ideas thrown out there,
Yep.
but we've kind of narrowed it down to focus on, what was it, 4?
Yeah, there's, in the extended white paper, there's maybe 12 or 15 different concepts, but they boil down to commercial reuse, which is a successful thing and has some challenges. Trying to find ways to build smaller size, lower price, but good quality housing. The corporate ownership, bringing those back into single family ownership, and I'm drawing a blank on the fourth. Somebody who has it, tell me. I think the smaller scale is in the builder resources. That's we're doing this. The builder resources, helping builders go to town meetings, planning board meetings, zoning board meetings with maybe a different set of reference material that talks about the long-term positive beneficial impacts of owner-occupied housing in a town.
So Matt, with Greater Rochester's enterprise, you guys are focused on really attracting businesses to the area. What role does housing availability play when a business is considering coming to the area?
First of all, thank you, and it's nice to see everybody this morning, be back face to face. So I think it all plays a role, because as we talk about, and it's very similar in the commercial and industrial development phase, we need more sites. So as we look at the activity level we see, it's often about quality of life. Where's my workforce coming from? Where do they live? What are the price of those homes? And then especially as they're bringing executives into the region, we're going through that now with Fairlife. We've gone through that before with OFD Foods, Edwards, and others. So it's finding that opportunity for home ownership in proximity to the site, the facility where they're at, and it's all connected to a great quality of life, which is part of our story and why we need more inventory.
Sure. And, are they taking into account, I know Jim's talked about this before, right? Not only the people that are going to be working there, but the people that are required support as well. You got your gas station workers, your restaurant workers, the people that are there because you're bringing, a certain amount of people in this area. Is that something that they consider as well?
Well, I think they do. It depends on the industry and their supply chain connectivity, what they need, if they're ideally bringing other vendors with them. But that they want to understand the community, and housing is an important part of that, as well as if we're working with a company now that hopefully we'll announce soon. They want to understand when they bring visiting executives here to look at prototyping and the research and development that they're working on. Where are people going to stay? Where can they stay over a longer duration of time, as well as they bring people and move them here too. So it's all connected.
Right, and it's not just for sale inventory, right? You're talking about long-term rentals,
right,
short-term rentals, and all the inventory that's required. That, again, this isn't just the shortage of homes for sale.
Right. And in some cases, we've seen requests for furnished housing, as they've got executives who locates the site is different from the person who's going to come in and get the thing built, if you will. And then there'll be yet someone else coming in to run it after we get up and running on the manufacturing side. So that connectivity to short-term space, rental, to market, to ownership is very important as people assimilate to the region. And really, we want to keep them here and growing as they continue on.
Great. So, Bob, this question, we see that there's a lot of money being spent around the region, really to revitalize smaller downtowns. I mean, we've seen a lot of money going into downtown Rochester as well, but we're not really seeing a big focus on housing. And can you really speak to why that is?
I could. Before I answer the question, one comment. I have to say this with this audience. I have a daughter who's in the audience as a realtor. I have learned so much about the real estate market and what realtors do in the last few years, which, quite frankly, is an awesome job that you do. But just how this market has changed. I learned more about escalation clauses and 40 or 50 offers on one house, and really the difficulty in actually buying a house and people being priced out of the market. So I've never had a 9-to-5 job in my life, and I want to just comment, the realtors here, I have a keen understanding how hard you work 24/7, 7 days a week, and the lenders as well. I think I just would ask you keep that going, because if we get to the answers, I think your really intensity in this whole market is huge because you're economic drivers. In terms of the housing and money, I was in Albany last night, came back in a snowstorm. The governor has now proposed putting housing on SUNY campuses. I'm on the SUNY board. That came up yesterday. She looked at a housing initiative last year that did not really pass the legislature. I think more on that coming up. But it is a huge issue. I think Matt touched on it. You got to think about Rochester. I would say we're not a Rust Belt any longer. There's a lot going on here. We're designated a tech hub with Buffalo and Syracuse. There could be potentially huge investment coming with that. Just a designation alone will draw companies here. Those companies need housing. Their executives will come. Their workers will come. And it goes from Syracuse, Rochester, and Buffalo all along the upstate corridor. So there really has to be a huge infusion of money into housing. And right now, I think I won't speak about builders, but there are a lot of challenges that they have right now. They need help. They do need help with the labor shortage, labor market, and the supply chain. I do think you'll see more of that coming up in terms of trying to infuse more housing here. Said before, we get it with the interest rates being what they are. People aren't moving. They're not going to sell their house and go buy at a much higher rate, so I think we're in a little stagnation right now. But there has to be much more investment because these companies are coming. And the last point I'll make, our two largest employers are hospital systems. And I'm sure there are relocation people here. Every day, there are doctors and people coming from around the country coming here, and far too often, they end up going to a rental opportunity because they can't find the house that they want. So the budget process just started in Albany. It's hard to say. I think anyone elected office does not know what the outcome will be till at least after April. But I would think, on many levels, housing really has to receive funding. And I would say some of the best lobbyists are right in a room. I think you have to really, with your elected officials, and use your voice to raise that because this market is phenomenal. I mean, we look at right now where we're at nationally and where we were. It's come up dramatically, but I think this progress will stop unless we end up getting more money, more funding, obviously, and much more help in trying to infuse this market, especially with new home builds.
And Matt, with this investment in downtown, is that driving business retention or expansion? Are you seeing that yet?
Yeah, we're very busy with companies, and we've seen this going back to 2019 and our first record year in 2020. We were very busy with companies that are making very innovative products. IDEX Health and Science has expanded yet again. We talk about Optimax a lot, Ortho Clinical, and other companies that have expanded through that period. There's hiring going on. So we really need to find a way, and it's, I think, a little systemic when you look at siting, whether it's site development on the industrial side or building new homes. We need to make it easier and streamline the process so that we're a little more commonsensical when it comes to supporting economic growth. And we're not used to that. So policy making, and you see this in the energy conversation, we've been kind of a Goldilocks economy for a long, long time, not too hot, not too cold, and I think we need to find solutions in bureaucratic circles where things are easier. We could go on and on about certain agencies, but money is part of the issue, but we wouldn't need as much funding if it was just a little easier.
So that's a great transition over to Jim. So Jim, as a builder, you face many challenges, right? From an approval of a project through completion. Can you just kind of share what the process is? You're thinking about a new project in a town, what steps you're taking and what you're going through, just to even think about being able to move forward.
Sure. It's very challenging, obviously. We're always looking as builders to where is the next good neighborhood, where is the right parcel that we can build on. But so many factors have to come together on those parcels that you have to find the right piece of land with the right road network and the right zoning, sewer, infrastructure, utilities. RG&E has been a challenge for us, and we need them to be a partner. And I know that it's not just on RG&E that they need cooperation at the state level, but there's all these infrastructure challenges. And then you get down to the local town level with zoning. And there really isn't zoning in many towns on land that exists to meet today's market. Typically, a lot of times it's a larger lot zoning or it's light industrial where we want to put residential, and we have to go through that transition process. And that transition process is hard for the area neighbors that are close by that they don't want to see a change, and they don't want to see you go from a large lot community that's on the zoning now to a more dense community that meets today's market. So then our town leaders are put in a position where they're stuck trying to balance what that homeowner wants that lives close by with what the market wants and what the developer wants. And the developers come in, and we're not just always greedy. We're trying to make numbers and projects work so that we can bring it on as affordable as possible. I've started using the term market rate affordable. We can't build affordable housing like you hear the word, because now affordable and new construction would be starting in the upper 3s and low 4s. But that's market rate affordable for where we are today. It's the cooperation with obviously the towns and getting the right zoning in place, and they have to balance what the current residents' feelings are and where their concerns are. Really interesting story that last week we have a large development that I'm proposing in Fairport with another developer next to us, Aristo, and it's over 200 homes. And we're going to go to the town board next month, and we held an informational meeting for residents to really hear their concerns. So we invited about 1,000 people from around the area to come to an informational session. And typically when you do that, only the people that are against the project show up with their concerns. And that's just the reality of it. I'm not, people have legitimate concerns, and it's traffic and it's drainage, and there's always the typicals. But the event that we had last week, 90% of the people that came were interested in what housing opportunities we were going to offer. And we had questions like, can we put lot deposits down now? When will you have something under construction that we could potentially move into? And we're very careful because we're just proposing a project. We don't have any approvals yet, and it requires a rezoning. So we tell them that, but we ask them that if you can come out and support us when we get into the town, please do. Because typically what happens is we go to a town meeting as a developer, and only the people that don't like the project or have concerns come in attendance, and there may be 20 or 30 people in the room. And then when you actually build the community, it's well received and it integrates into the neighborhood, and there's rarely any real concerns after it's built. That's a real challenge, is working with getting the right infrastructure in place and the town leaders being able to support you through that process while balancing the current residents. So that's one of the things that we're constantly working with, and there's a few of the town board members and supervisors here in the room that I've worked with that we have that challenge, and we get through the process together, but it's a hard process. To piggyback on what Bob said as far as funding, there is so much money that goes towards affordable rental housing, and there really is no state money that goes towards affordable ownership housing in a large sense. And it's up to us as a developer to put all the pieces together and pay for all the infrastructure improvements, whether that's bringing in the sanitary sewer or the RG&E additional capacity. Whatever we need, we have to pay for. And then we in turn have to put that all on the consumer to pay us for that so we can make money. And at some point you hope that if the state really recognizes that there's this need for housing, do they get involved in extending sanitary sewers? Do they get involved in helping us with infrastructure costs so that can be passed along to the consumer? And that's one thing that never happens, but if we do truly have a crisis, that's a way to start to try to solve it, because people can't afford $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 houses as the norm, but that's where it's going with our construction costs, and it's really not sustainable.
Yeah, and I think one thing that stuck out to me when we met and we're talking about some of these challenges is you mentioned that your profit margins were greater building a cheaper house at $250,000 price point than where you are today. And can you talk about really what's driving? And you touched on a little bit with the regulatory concerns, but what else is really driving that cost increase?
Sure.
And again, this is not about profit margin. It's just an example of what we're really facing, because it is more than just the builder making money on the home. It's affordability.
Yeah, it's interesting that pre-COVID we were selling townhomes in the high twos, like 290, and then we're selling townhomes at 400, and we're actually making a better profit margin at 290 pre-COVID than we are at 400, and the costs have gone up 35 to 40%. So it's all the inflationary things that we know about from COVID and supply chain and the government putting so much stimulus and so much money and cheap money into the economy that now you have all this money chasing fewer goods, and obviously we got the inflation. But that's been our challenge. So, how do we now start to build something that's more affordable? And do we, we're starting to look at new designs where we're making the home smaller and more efficient, but still trying to make the right type of homes that people want to live in. So it's that challenge of how do we balance those pieces of these really high costs versus where people want to live and what they can afford.
And I know one of the things that was talked about in the paper was trying to narrow the lot size and maybe build up versus building wide. What types of challenges does something like that face?
So, I mean, obviously it's maximizing density. And as I touched on a little bit, when we go into a town and rezone a piece of property, we want to go in and maximize density because the infrastructure costs are so high that the more homes we can put on that piece of land with that same infrastructure, the better we can bring that average price point down. But then when you get into it, it's always the resistance of the neighbors close by, which I said, I recognize their concerns and understand it. But from a business sense, you're trying to maximize that so you can take advantage of the high cost of infrastructure, the high cost to build.
And what about the workforce? Is that still a challenge?
Workforce is very much a challenge. We see now on top of our high costs, everything just takes longer. We do a lot of residential construction. We do some multifamily construction. And you see that all of these subcontractors are challenged. All their crew sizes are smaller. What used to be a 6, 7, 8-man crew is now 2 or 3 guys. What used to take us 5 months to build takes 7 or 8 months to build. And obviously there's another inherent cost that now you're paying more for your money that you're borrowing, and that builds into that price that has to go to the consumer. So there's just a lack of labor force. And I mean, is there something that starts at a vocational school level in high school where you start to people realize you can make a really good living going into construction with 0 college debt coming out of it? And what we used to pay $12, $15 an hour for is now $25 an hour to start, and goes up very quickly when they get some skills.
Great. And so Bob, go ahead, Jim.
I was thinking, I know Bob's working really hard on workforce development. Is there anything you want to add to that?
He's absolutely right.
Okay.
It's amazing I'll speak for the city, with the poverty levels that we have, actually urban and even rural poverty. And these jobs are available that you can come out, be trained, and the building trades are dying for new people to come in. You try and call somebody for repair or construction or get some. I just went through a build out with our new office. It is elongated because of just the supply issues, but also labor costs and labor availability. And it is a huge issue. And I think sometimes high schools get ranked as to how many kids go on to college. The purpose of education is really to create a person who could make a good living and end up, really being a big participant in our communities. I think there's so many jobs available right now that could be enhanced by college, but you can come out of high school and you can go to work right away. And not only for construction, but the entire semiconductor industry that we're seeing really burgeoning across the state. Those jobs, those tech jobs, by and large, do not require any college education. They can be trained through our community colleges, even through high schools. So that is a key issue. And it's for, Matt will say this, I'll say it. If you look at companies coming in and look at this whole process from Micron in Syracuse, which will bleed over to Edwards out in the STAMP project, these companies are going to need employees to come in. And we have a T-Mobile site out in Henrietta right now. I think they're growing right now, but they're going to probably have close to 500 people out there. But they're on a big hiring spree right now to get people in. And in many cases, our lives have changed post-COVID. I was going to mention, for those that think that nobody wants to live here, we have a program in the chamber, thanks to Rob Sands, called Rock Remote, and trying to attract remote workers from around the country to come here. And when you hear about everybody's fleeing New York and leaving, we have people from 50 states, 4,000 people have applied. We'll provide $10,000 to a person that will move here. They may work in California, Arizona, Hawaii, but they'll move here, buy a house, hopefully buy versus rent, buy cars, move their family here, their spouse or family will get jobs. The funding only goes so far. It's all private sector funding, but the mere fact that 4,000 people from every single state want to move here. And I would say one of the biggest impediments is not a job because they have one, it is what's available for housing. So all these issues kind of play in, and I think the economy going forward is going to really be totally dependent on what we do with housing and how it goes. And I agree 100%. Affordable housing is probably receiving a majority of funding from the government, where there has to be some segmentation over to the private sector and helping. And maybe one last comment, the power issue, I think we kind of touched on it. It's probably holding up a handful of projects right now, getting power connected to a housing development. If the utility, whether it be RG&E or anyone across the state, If they hook it up, if they absorb the cost, they have to put it back on a ratepayer, which the Public Service Commission does not like. And then they put it on the backs of the developer, which is cost prohibitive for them as well. We don't know the result, but right now, the governor's office and state, they have 3 different agencies looking at trying to resolve this, because it's a policy issue, it's a money issue, and probably a supply issue too, because we learned in this, a power transformer that might be needed for a development may take up to 2 years to get because of the supply chain, and they're around the globe. You can't get one if you have all the money in the world, you can't get one for less than 18 months. So as Matt will tell you, if he's trying to bring a company to Rochester and they're told you can't get power for 18 months, they're going off to Ohio or Pennsylvania or someplace else. So we're not sure the results on this, but it is like it's a firestorm building. You probably saw a story about Henrietta, but it's not just here, it's around the state. It really requires a 3-pronged attack to try and fix it, and we need to fix it quickly, because if not, housing and business development are both going to suffer dramatically.
So, Bob, your organization is really, known for their focus on solving problems, kind of overcoming obstacles, and really creating opportunities to bring people together. So, what kind of obstacles does a housing initiative like what Jim has proposed in this paper, what do we face, right? What are we up against, and how do we really impact the change?
One of the big issues right now is money, because right now, I think it's been said, a lot of money was spent 2 years ago, and I think right now every budget is stressed. I'm listening to school issues on the way to here today, school budgets, and right now they're starting the whole process with budgeting in Albany. I think money is one issue, but I think what we all can do is, we lobby, we have great elected officials who work very hard. We have local elected officials right here, but our legislators as well. What we don't do, we don't ever get on a soapbox and criticize people. I learned one thing in elected office: you criticize somebody publicly, they forget in about 30 years. So you might as well not go that route. Letters, conversations, you can have those conversations with people. I find our delegation, we listen, some are super responsive coming, but getting that done in Albany is sometimes very difficult. It just is. It's a very difficult process. It's a very left-leaning state legislature right now, and we'd like them to be a little more business-friendly. It's really going to be important to have their support. But we have to keep putting pressure on them, and I think the best way to carry over this case is to show data. I think showing our growth, showing our impediments, and not just talking about those, in vagaries, but really having very specific data to make that case. And I find that sometimes you make progress in maybe inches or feet. You're not going to get a 180-degree turn, but I think you start that process, and it has to be relentless lobbying. I know Mark Cohen from my team is here. When Chamber advocates in Albany, and having been there in a 4-year term, on Labor Day, when the unions come, you can't move in the Capitol. It's shoulder to shoulder. On business day, you could hear a pin drop, because people can't walk away from their jobs. They can't go down, and I came back last night. I hate driving to Albany and driving back. 3 hours, 3.5 hours. It's snowing, it's even worse. It's a tough drive to make, it really is, when you have business to do. But I do think the meetings with local delegations, but also there's nothing like face-to-face lobbying and getting down there. And applaud Jim, because Jim's on our board. He does a phenomenal job keeping everybody advised of the whole issue with housing and real estate. And I think we just have to have a collective voice that keeps on pushing and pushing and pushing. And sometimes you get the door closed, but I think if you don't give up and keep pushing consistently, we're going to make a lot of progress on this. And I think that the charts, and I really appreciate the opening presentation, I think that data is clear at a national level. And the governor right now is touting housing, so if that's one of our biggest priorities, I think now is the time to really strike.
So just in summary, Jim, with this housing initiative, we really identified some key issues that we think can help. We have over 350 people in the room. What are some things, if you had to give a key takeaway to everyone in here, what are some of those things that they can do to really help support the initiative and help us drive change?
I think that the number one thing is we all need to just start thinking differently. The tendency is we say we need more housing, is we'll go out and build more housing, and we'll build more developments, like Jim said, 450, 500 and up, because that's what you can get done. But that's not what we need, and our data shows clearly that's not what we need. So we have to be willing to kind of set that aside and say, what do we need to grow the whole region going forward? And we cannot forget about the people, our friends and neighbors who live here, who are renters, many of them generational renters, who would like to be owners at some point. We can't focus on building housing for the Micron executives coming in that are going to be able to afford $700,000 homes if we can't support the people who live here now. And that's the critical piece. If we can solve that 100 to 250, 150, 300 market segment, it provides opportunity for thousands and thousands of our neighbors to become part of the home ownership group, which leads to wealth generation, leads to stability, housing stability. The positive social and economic benefits are well documented. Better economic outcomes, better educational outcomes, more stability in neighborhoods. People just act differently when they own the housing they're living in. And so my perspective is, if we can focus on that for a little bit and start making some dents there, that opens up everything. It gets the wheels moving. It lets people be mobile. It lets people who want to buy. It lets people who are in those homes move up, move sideways. That's the key, is we have to be willing to find a way to get housing that is affordable for someone making median income or a little bit lower, and reconnect those pathways to home ownership. I've been a little involved with Action for Better Communities, has a green lining project to kind of reverse the impacts of redlining, which are 50, 60-year impacts. And that's a monumental task, but we have to do that. And many of the lenders in this room I know are affiliated with that program. We have to solve that problem, because the economic power of this group of people who want to be owners, if we can get them down that path, changes everything. It changes the outcomes in schools, it changes tax situations. So we have to be willing to say, how can we provide comfortable, appropriate housing for someone that's $150,000 or less? And when you come up with an idea, so that the governor last year proposed accessory dwelling units as one of her kind of things in her housing compact. And the immediate reaction was, no way, not in this town. We don't like those. Those are awful. But they're not awful. If you go to Seattle, it costs you $1 million to get an accessory dwelling unit. And it's 600 square feet in somebody's side yard. But they're new. They're high quality. They're safe. They're environmentally sustainable. And if we have an active senior who is living in a 3-bedroom home and they don't want it, but they can't leave because it's paid off and what they want to move to is going to be outrageously expensive, why wouldn't you want them to live in your, independently in your side yard? It solves so many issues, and it frees up a home for somebody who wants that home. But we don't want to talk about those things because we jump to why they won't work. And so we need to start thinking about why things could work. And we're not talking about, let's build 5,000 accessory dwelling units, but we could build 100 in our 11-county region and nobody would even know. And that would solve 100 housing issues for a certain group of people and create 100 new homes for people who need those. That's how you solve the problem. You start chipping away at the edges, start filling that lower price range, and it creates mobility for everybody else.
Okay, piggyback, I'm sorry. And along with, obviously, the homeownership is very important, and we do a mix of both for sale and multifamily for rent. And I always point out that the multifamily that we build for rent does create opportunity for homeownership, because so many times who we're getting are people that are a little bit older, they're empty nesters or they're seniors, and they've lived in the house that they've owned for a long time, and it's a style of home that's probably a 2-story that doesn't really meet their needs anymore. And they've been looking for where do they go, and they don't have a good option to where they go. So we build little higher end rental communities, and they come there and they sell their home. So every house that we add to the market creates an opportunity for somebody, whether they want to be a renter or they're going to leave that house that they've owned for years and it's not the right house, and maybe it's more affordable because it's a little bit older. They sell that house and somebody has an opportunity to own that and start over with that life cycle of that house.
Just 2 quick points. We didn't mention commercial real estate, but as people would know in the room here, it's taken a huge hit, and that could be an opportunity as well. It came up, I think, briefly before, but there's one major building downtown right now that is completely vacant, one that's probably 60% vacant, and we're seeing it. I'm in a building right now where one of the tenants just reduced 5 floors. So some of it's post-COVID, it's remote, connected, but a lot of empty space in these commercial buildings. I'll speak about downtown Rochester, but then beyond. And it could be a huge opportunity. Last thing, I'm not sure if you use this as a strategy, but I'm involved with a tax issue with one of our local companies right now. What I would suggest from the realtors, if you compile, and this is how you get the state's attention, what they reap in tax benefits from your sales in a room collectively, mortgage taxes, the whole, look at the entire ecosystem for real estate, and speak for Rochester, this region, 11-county region, what you, from last year, how many dollars went to the New York State tax coffers. That's how you get their attention, because you are a huge economic driver. And so I think Jim's point, while the private builds don't get much attention, I think when you show what those private builds end up doing for state coffers that funds all these myriad of programs that they fund every year, I think you will get their attention. And it comes from incomes, personal incomes, from sales, but right on down every bit of tax money. And I'm sure it's easily captured in this region, but, and I would gather that, I would publish that if need be, maybe not publish it publicly, take it to them first, but I think that will definitely get their attention.
Building off of that, back to Matt, if we could do that. So the way I look at it, there's tons of money available because it may not be government money, but there's money out there and it's looking for a way to make money. If we had the right plan and we went to the state, would they be open to that? And if they were open to that, could we get some sort of pilot project to invest some money to try some of these things? And if we had a little success of that, how does that go back to Matt and attracting new business? Because now you're in a positive virtual cycle instead of this negative one where everything is going the wrong way. It doesn't seem that hard. We have the data. We could compile the data. I think our three organizations together could come up with something that's really compelling. So if we do that, will the state listen? And if the state listens, can we just have this as another tool for Matt to use to attract and retain more business? And does that then lead in back into the workforce development, which I think is the final piece, because now you have people creating career jobs, earning money to support themselves, that are building the future to attract more business, which brings more money in, which goes to all of this extra revenue, and now we're really moving at full speed.
Yeah, well, I think that makes sense. I think the other thing we were talking about before the panel is also aligning with other associations, commercial real estate, NFIB, the Business Council, and leveraging the ecosystem in the sense of how this improves quality of life, how it's all connected, and that kind of gets you back to your last point. It is very important, and people are unaware. So going back to a point Jim made, show up at some of those town board meetings and some of those planning meetings, and just offer a voice of support. And it doesn't have to be a lecture, but just a passing comment about how things are really working, because policy making these days is largely done by Twitter, if you still call it that. So there is a little bit of a lack of understanding as to how things have been passed 3 or 4 years ago and what that means on Main Street. So if you have that opportunity, show up, and like Bob said, if whether you can participate in Albany or not, but certainly at your local level, and just have a conversation, not being disrespectful, but there are challenges now as we've got layers and layers of activity, certainly during COVID, and things that were initially put in place for good reason now have had some impacts on how business is actually being slowed down. And for us, the work that we do to recruit companies to the area, as well as support the companies that are already here, and we want them to grow, and we need more people, as Bob talked about, it's all connected. And it's very, very important to make that process easier to keep people in the state and help people build homes and live here and have a great quality of life.
Yeah, Matt's point, and it was mentioned twice today, and I think our elected officials know better than anybody. You sit in these meetings, and sometimes we are held hostage by 10 people when the 10,000 want to support something. You could look at the Business Improvement District downtown Rochester, and you go on to other projects. And I think it's because the larger collective voice is not heard. And so who wants to go to meetings? And I'm sure, we have a number of people that sit every night at these meetings, but you have to listen, and you have to respect the opinions of people that disagree, but we're not hearing enough from people that do agree. And I honestly think this country is not in the far left or far right. It's between the 40-yard lines. And those voices don't get heard enough. So any chance you can to support, Jim's comments and, in my life with the city, sitting through housing and developments, there's always somebody who's going to disagree with something. Could be 3 or 4 people, and I think you always respect that. Maybe you adjust your plan, but the other voices are not heard. And sometimes things get stagnated or stopped because of that. And last point what Jim made, always go for a beta test project. You're never going to solve things statewide or nationwide, but you can make an appeal for a project somewhere. And we have a very esteemed business leader right now, and she's working on something to try to address poverty, not across the city or community, but in one little pocket. And I think it's going to work. And you show success, and you could broaden it, because so many other things don't work. So I think I would applaud you, Jim, if you'd try just something, pick something somewhere, and go with it, and I think we'd always support you.
And I think one of the takeaways we hoped for from this was to just have this conversation with more people in the community. We're all in this together. And we're not, like you said, we're not accusing anybody of anything. We're not throwing stones at anybody. But we're all in this together. And all of our industries and our community depends on this. And there are other entities who are working on solutions. I just read Airbnb has put together a housing council to advise them on how they can capture more properties to turn them into Airbnbs. And we're not doing that. And I think with the people in this room, we could come up with our own local council to talk about these issues and really push push this movement forward. We have good support from all the people I've talked to at our state and federal delegation who want to help us solve this problem. We need the local municipalities involved too, but we need nonprofit, we need community development, we need business development, we need everybody kind of rowing in the same direction.
All right. Planning boards and zoning boards of individual towns and villages have control over how many properties in their communities can be used, zoned as rentals. Is there a way to encourage them to limit single-family homes used as rentals even further? Nobody wants to take that one?
Table number one.
To encourage them.
To encourage them to limit the amount of single-family homes used as rentals.
I will take, I think that's a question, and I think we don't want to put anybody on the spot because that's difficult, and it gets back to what Bob was saying. There's 10 vocal people who come in, and you have to respect them, but we don't hear from the others. So I think the concept we've been talking about, I know the projects that Jim's described to me are kind of mixed use, mixed types of housing, and I think that adds to the density. It adds to the leveraging the infrastructure you're building out over more units, brings the prices down. But I also think that there's maybe at times a stigma on rental housing. And I've talked to people who say, hey, we're all in favor of owner occupied. I'm not sure she wants the rental in here. But I think we're missing one of the huge needs is housing for independent active seniors. And that may be rental. But those are people who come to your town and they spend a lot of money. They go out to eat. They don't mow their own lawn. They hire someone to do the lawn. They hire someone to shovel and plow. They go and they shop. Those are great people do you want in your town using local businesses, I would think. But I think it gets caught in, well, that's rental, let's not do rental. Young professionals want the same type of housing that active seniors want. And that's another great group to have spending money in your town. They don't want to do any of that stuff either. And so I think we're stuck on rental as maybe not being as attractive, but it's a good way to add density to the project, brings costs down, add some diversity to the neighborhood, and that's all good.
And to piggyback, the demand for the rental communities is amazing. How fast they fill up when you build them. As fast as you can build them, they're leased.
So one of the other questions that kind of piggybacks off of that is, what about condos, right? What is the appetite for condos within the city limits, the appetite for condos in the surrounding areas? Obviously, that's an easy way to increase density, and we've even talked about maybe converting commercial space into condos, right? We touched on that a little bit. Have any of you guys have any insight into that? Everybody's going to look at you, Jim.
One concern I had, I think downtown, a lot of condos, a lot of reuse of buildings, but I think it's about 94% occupied, the last numbers I heard, but almost all, with few exceptions, are rentals. There's that one tower on East Avenue, huge tax breaks many years ago, but I think probably the largest owner-occupied building. I'm not sure where they stand today with each unit, but majority of those housing units downtown are rental, which it's great to have people downtown, but also it does not bring the kind of stability you'd like to have with people actually owning.
And I think it's about choice. So the more options you have, the better off you are along the continuum.
And my understanding is there are financing issues with condos different than townhomes or other things because the way just because of their condos. But I think that's another area where we need to kind of be a little more open-minded and say, okay, so maybe there's some issues with these and we need some regulatory issue or financing relief. But think about the condos that we do have, not in the city, but around, they're in huge demand. They're in huge demand. And when one goes up, ask the realtors in the room, how many offers do you get on a condo? A lot. So it's a need, and it's something that people want. So why aren't we finding ways to get past the hurdles to build more? And that's the question we have to come up with the solution for as a crew.
And as you talk about the word multifamily is kind of another word, right?
Yep.
Is that all that same concept, or is the condo looked at the same?
That I don't know. I think based on my conversations with our members, condos are very much in demand. There just aren't any, and it's tough to build them.
All right, and then the age-old question, property taxes. So property taxes in New York, we know we have the caps in place, but they continue to rise. I don't know that any of us can solve that problem, or if any of us have an answer to that, but is there any end in sight, and is there, how do we limit the spending to keep the taxes down? Maybe, Bob, that may be more of an appropriate question.
It's tough. I know, I honestly, I think all the elected officials want to keep their taxes down and lower them, and in some cases they do. But often, I know Jeff McCann's from the county, so much of their expenses come from Medicaid and health expenses. And so I think it becomes one of those issues that with the rising costs and pressures coming from Albany and Washington, that sometimes is the only source of revenue that the cities really drive on. The city has a homestead, non-homestead tax, which rotated. We cut the taxes and the tax rates. So there's two different things, your taxes and also your assessments. So there's two different areas where you can figure out the taxes. It's a tough one because I do think whether you're a town, a village, a city, a county, nobody is flush with cash. So they're always trying to survive and keep their services going. And it is hard compared to my family in Atlanta and family in the South that, the tax bases are very different down there, but also the services are different. I think when you look, I think we have far more services up here that we like and don't want to lose, but we pay for those. And so I think I think it drives seniors out of here when you hear about the out-migration when they're retired. And I think one of the strategies should be the state should look at a whole different effort to maybe keep seniors here, make it more palatable financially, as opposed to them fleeing and going someplace away from their families out of state. I don't think it's just for the weather. I think a lot of these moves are financial. And other states are much more tax-friendly, and it's difficult, but I would say that local government, they're kind of caught in a vice here. I don't think anybody wants to just on their own raise taxes, but all the pressure's on their backs. That's the only way sometimes they can survive. And I just look at the local officials here. They try very hard to stabilize, sometimes drop those taxes, but it becomes very, very hard, and nobody wants to say no to something that was funded last year that people like. So it just becomes one of those ongoing issues. And if it ever was able to get solved, I think it would be a huge boost. I will say, if you cut taxes on businesses, that money does not go to a golden parachute. It really gets reinvested. And any CEO will tell you if you reduce it, it'll be an easy draw for may have to bring companies in, but companies that stay here. And there's one local company, this tax situation they told me if they moved to 2 other states in the South, they would save between $10 and $50 million a year. And so that's real money. It's a pretty big company, but if we could ever solve that one in the state, and it's been going on for a long, long time, and a lot of it is not just adding more money. It's someone's got to say no to the spending, and you have to any business you either increase your profit or reduce your spending. And I think sometimes that level they don't say no to things, and we're all waiting for this budget process to come out because we have the governor's budget, which is announced, and God knows what will show up on April 1st because it's the next 2 or 3 months. It's going to be just arm wrestling back and forth, and who knows what we'll see come April 1st or beyond.
Yeah, and I would just say that's another message where you should be talking to your elected officials.
Does an increase in density outweigh the demand for services where if you're increasing density in turn, not raising property taxes, but increasing the property tax dollar, is that enough to offset where then taxes can stabilize or potentially lower? Or is the demand for services so great that it's just even that increase in taxes is only going to just cover the demand?
I would say reducing the pressure on local governments would be one because they have a lot of things that, these non-mandated costs. When I was with the state, we did a mandate relief commission. Went around the state, probably 20 or 30 pages of great ideas that could really reduce taxes, reduce cost of living, and really by tax reduction. And I'm not sure what happened to it, but it certainly was not published. So it was a shelf somewhere because it's pretty gutsy moves. And I think Jim said before, insanity is defined and doing the same things over and over again, expecting different results. And I think we have to look at major changes in so many different systems and be bold and make those changes. And I'm not sure that's something you're going to see at certain levels, that those drastic changes are sometimes very hard to make. But I do think, I'll go back to, we have to be much more affordable. I mean, Matt will point to, it's not just Florida and Texas, it's Ohio, it's Pennsylvania. I'm with a case right now, and New Jersey has a better tax climate. So I think that and it really comes down to spending. And I honestly think it's saying no to some things and looking at programs. Every time I read something, we need more programs, I would say, when's the last time they looked at programs that exist, evaluate, are they worthwhile? What is the impact? Because I think we spend a whole lot of money on things that don't matter and make no impact because nobody wants to say no, as opposed to, you have to say no. You may have some shouting and protesting, but if we're going to make changes, say no to things that don't work, invest in things that do work, and it's much easier said than done.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. And that concludes the program. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We appreciate everyone coming and your time. Have a great day. Thank you.